Okay, welcome to the Plutus Foundation webinar series. Today is Latina Equal Pay Day, and this is a great time to talk to some of our favorite people and find out a little more about what Latina Equal Pay Day means and what we can do to fix some of the situation that we're in. So I am so thrilled to have with us today Natalie Torres-Haddad from Financially Savvy Latina, Daniella Flores from I Like to Dabble, and Athena Valentine from Money Smart Latina. Hi, everyone. How are you today?
Good. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing well, doing just well. So what we'll do today is we'll just kind of leave this open. And for anyone listening in, feel free to go ahead and share this on any of your social media platforms. We are live on Instagram. We are live on Facebook. We are live on YouTube. We are all over the place. It's really exciting. Please share it. And type your questions into whatever platform you're reading this. We will get those questions here, and we will try to answer those as we go along. So thank you for watching. And so what I'd like to start off with is just the basics. What is the Latina pay gap, and what does this day, October 29th, mean?
I think I'll start. So I think the three of us, we all have this a lot of people are mistaking it, thinking it's a day of celebratory, especially if they've never really heard what Latina Equal Pay Day means. And it isn't. It's actually a very frustrating day. It's basically bringing awareness to the masses, specifically employers, our colleagues, to understand that as Latinas, majority in the US are not only getting paid less, but they're getting much, much, much less. The national average shows 53 cents to the dollar, depending what state you're in. In California, it's 41 cents to the dollar. So we understand that we can be doing the exact same job and not getting paid. I mean, if anything, we're getting paid almost half. And so this is a day to show that it actually takes more than 300 days. It happens to fall on October 29th. Last year was November 20th. And it's basically almost paying a whole extra year, working an extra year to catch up to our white male counterparts. So it's that's kind of how I explain it to people when I say it's not a celebratory day. It's just a day that we're trying to bring awareness to hopefully bridge that gap.
So October 29th is the date that that shows that 10 months of extra work must be done in order to catch up to what the average pay for a white male receives for the same job.
Yes.
So, so why is that the case? What are some of the causes?
I think a lot of it has to do with women are the primary caretakers in a lot of Latino households. I know my mom was, and because we lived in a multi-generational household, a lot of her time was spent not only taking care of me, but also taking care of my grandma and my grandpa, making sure they were always situated, shuttling them back and forth to like their doctor appointments, the Social Security office. My grandparents were also, they were functioning illiterate. So like they could write their name and they could do a few things, but they couldn't really read or write that well. So my mom spent a lot of time doing that for them as well. And because of that, my mom really had a hard time holding down a full-time job. So because of being a caretaker, and she didn't know how to, well, I don't even know if it was passed yet, but the FMLA Act, she didn't even know how to utilize that if it was passed at that time.
So what is it about being caregivers that causes the pay gap to exist?
I think a lot of women leave the workforce. They don't understand how the FMLA works. The FMLA works by in guaranteeing your job is on hold for you for about 12 weeks. Of course, it is unpaid if you do decide to take FMLA leave, but at the same time, it guarantees that you can have 3 months off to take care of a family member, whether that be your parent or your spouse or your child, and you're not going to lose the progress that you've already made in your career. A lot of times, women especially, instead of trying to figure it out, we just we're scared of being a lot of us are scared of being confrontational or negotiating or conflict. So a lot of us find it easier to back out of the workforce instead of just staying, figuring out FMLA and going from there. every time we stop and backtrack, every time we stop and we quit a job or we leave a position of power, we end up backtracking with our career. And I think that actually hinders us, especially as Latina women, from moving forward in our career or losing any progress that we've made since.
So is that a cultural, just across the board?
I feel like it is. I know for, I think it depends on the country or what generation you are. I'm a second generation. So my mom did work part-time, but like I said, she was primarily the caretaker for the whole entire family. My dad was the one that worked. My mom really didn't, like, I mean, we weren't rich or anything, but my mom was like able to stay at home with me. And then also, like I said, like myself, I'm working full time. I have a business, so I don't see myself being the primary caretaker for my family, but I think it might be a generation kind of thing. But I know a lot of Latino families, our parents and our cousins and our tias and our tios were very traditional. And that's something that a lot of Latinos also have to deal with is, you know, the traditional gender roles.
And what we see, to chime back on, that same question, is it has a lot to do with the accountability that we're holding with these companies within our country. A lot of higher education is still valued. So when we look at the statistics, specifically among the Latina community, very few have the higher education. The percentages are really small. We see that obviously for women that have a college degree, they usually make double more than anyone that would be a high school degree at graduate. And that is something that not only we're talking about generational wealth, we're talking about just trying to catch up to be equal. We also graduate with a lot more student debt because most likely we are the first in our family. I'm an immigrant. Personally, I went through not only dealing with student debt, but moving on to get my master's and all the higher education that we invest in ourselves. It takes a lot longer to not only pay off that debt, but to just try to start from ground zero, which our white male counterparts usually already have an up when they just start in their careers. And we start looking at industries such as STEM, finance. Obviously, this is what Plutus Awards Foundation really does look at. How are we contributing to our society, right? And so when we look at some of these industries, not only do we make up a small group of it, especially for women of color, especially Latinas, but then we're also competing with someone that didn't have to worry about the student debt, didn't have to worry about contributing to taking care of our elderly parents or grandparents or children. And so these are not only issues that should be not only brought about, the whole company should be educating, should be advocating, should be informing how they can be part of that conversation, but what they can actually do to take action to start doing that. I know we're going to get into it, kind of what we can take control of. As Latinas, there's only so much that we feel we can take control of. And this is partly why all of us are advocating and speaking up and sharing people's stories, including ourselves, because we want to make sure that doesn't continue to happen, especially if we are told, hey, you're going to go to college, you're going to most likely get better pay. And we see how our mothers, unfortunately, if they didn't have a college education, how it took them twice as long, if not decades, to get to or someone that's graduating from college. And so there is so many different factors. A lot of it does have to do different cultures. And depending what generation you are, whether you're first gen or third generation, this is something that is still a huge problem.
Well, yeah, that's a great point about higher education, because as a second generation, my dad's from Venezuela. He's the one who immigrated over here. And it was kind of part of a program where they send the males to go to school in America. And then he kind of took that value of higher education. It's like what he just kept like shoving down my throat. Like, you have to go to college, you have to go to college, you have to go to college. So, getting student loans and finding the resources to bring down my tuition, all those things weren't available. I mean, I don't think they would have been available to me if I didn't have the resources for one, his experience. And then I am half Latina, so my mother's kind of connections at the same time. If I were him coming over, I don't know what I would have done.
You mentioned Natalie. You mentioned STEM a few moments ago. I'm curious as to what professions and occupations and types of jobs might be more amenable to equal pay towards Latinas, and where there might be more of an issue.
Yeah, there's a report that I like to always let people know. I'm obviously based out of California, but there is a report called The Status of Women and Girls. And this one is by St. Mary's College and the university. And they actually do the breakdown throughout the country and by state. I recommend people to look into their state to see exactly how that breakdown is, because it does it by industry. So we do see the higher earning jobs, which is the STEM programs, right? Which is, anything that's technology, math, engineering, that tend to pay more and obviously have more benefits for those that are employed by these particular companies, right? Because they either will help you with your higher education, whatever retirement accounts they have, programs. So you have all these additional benefits that you're getting from that particular employment. So then when you're looking at more of a laborious job, usually in social work and in think of another, but social work, we see that a lot, especially in education as well. This is where it happens, and there isn't as much transparency within the companies. And I think that's something we are doing our best to try to advocate for companies to show not only the transparency of what they're paying their salary for their employees, but allowing women, specifically women of color, we can say, what is it that you're getting paid? For many of us, we have the situation when we leave a job is when we find out, hold on, our male counterparts are getting paid how much more? Or, and this becomes the shock for us. So it obviously, one, devalues our worth and makes us deal more with the imposter syndrome, which is another whole other topic we would dive into. But I think this is something when we look at every particular industry, it's a problem throughout. And just the fact that we're still having to advocate for it makes it a little bit more, definitely makes it more frustrating.
And Daniela was talking about education, higher education earlier. And, there's two things crossed my mind is, number one, if you control for level of education, does that, what happens to the gap at that point? And then in order for Latinas to find resources for making college more affordable, what can be done for that?
Well, just to speak locally here in St. Louis, there's actually a resource, can't remember the exact website, but they post different resources on there about how to get financial aid for school, as well as other ways to find. So when COVID happened, this is kind of when the site blew up around St. Louis, where it had just resources of how to apply for unemployment and navigate those sort of things. So look to local resources, maybe your city or your municipality or neighborhood might have some sort of like nonprofit website that's set up that you can go to. As soon as I find that website, what the name is, I will definitely post it in the chat.
We'll share it along, sure.
Yeah.
I work with a lot of first-generation high school students for a state-affiliated nonprofit. The state-affiliated nonprofit I work for is Jobs for Arizona's graduates. We are a state affiliate of Jobs for America's graduates. We focus on having first-generation high school students move up into a post-sec, not only get them graduated out of high school, but help them move into the workforce and into a post-secondary of their trade. I highly recommend looking to see if there are programs in your schools. I know here we have programs like JAG, we have programs like Be a Leader, and we work with making sure our kids understand what financial aid is, the different types of financial aid, and how they can go about applying for it. I myself am in charge for the state of Arizona of all our scholarships. Last year, our program pulled in over $11 million just because we were looking at those, we were looking at those opportunities for our students. We were teaching them what goes into a personal mission statement. We were teaching them how do you actually apply, how do you get a reference letter, that kind of thing. And then I spoke on a panel for the Mamas Talk Money Summit about 2 weeks ago. And along with figuring out financial aid for higher ed, a lot of people were wondering, how do we even tell our kids about the trades? I know we mentioned STEM as a career that a lot of people can make money in. I also know because of affirmative action, people are looking for to higher their diversity rate. So a lot of those fields, if you are Latina, you might have an easier time getting into a company because they do have to meet that quota. But also, talk about trades. Like you can go and you can be an electrician, or you can go work for a construction company and you can go to school for 6 to 9 months and you could be making more than your friends that have a 6-year degree. So I think that's something also that we need to explain to Latinas as well. Talk to them more about trade programs and certificate programs. And those usually are affordable. And like I said, a lot of those programs, because they do not only want women, they also want Latinas, they'll pay for it and they'll pay for you to have an apprenticeship.
Yeah, that's a great point. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say some of the national organizations, particularly to the industry. So for Latinas, there's Latinas in Finance, is a national organization, nonprofit that does scholarships. Alpha is another one. It's ALPFA or LPFA, Accounting Association, Management thing that includes it. These are national organizations that provide scholarships along with mentors in those industries and companies. So that's one of the biggest things too, is not only getting paid and being able to afford to go to school, but staying in school, because Latinos have a larger drop-off rate than any other ethnicity when they go to higher their masters. And so another one that is also for engineering, particularly for Latinos, is a national organization. I'm going blank right now. I wanted to say Mecha, but it's a different one. And so if you put in those are the top ones that we see that will not only pay full rides, but usually will also set you up in a fellowship that that you have a mentor that will walk you through what their process was and will help you with placement of a job. Because as we're talking about, they're looking to be able to fit some of those criteria of diversification. And then your local sororities, most sororities are national. A lot of my scholarships came from my sorority, and it was, obviously that's something that really helped me to not have as much debt as I could have had. And so sometimes we look at your own organizations on campus, and they don't have to necessarily be catered for Latinos, but it's something that you should be applying for and asking for. The letter recommendation is where I see most people come shy of, because we're taught not to brag about ourselves. We're taught not to boast or be boastful or talk about our accomplishments, but that's what's going to help you get that scholarship, get that job interview as well. So learning how to go confidently on what you know, where you're coming from, what your experience is, and talk about some of those challenges. I always let people know I'm an immigrant refugee, so that means I had to deal with other traumatic experiences. And so that lets them know that I worked just as hard just to get here, right? So I think when people learn how to advocate for themselves and being able to ask for that money, it's a little bit easier to win those scholarships.
Yeah, I think working in a trade job too, like electrician, like Athena had brought up earlier, it also opens you to something like the electrical union. So if you are a union member, you do have a chance of getting more equal pay as well as better benefits over time and things that you might not have access to right away like that. So let's say you do a program like that a couple months down the road, you have your you can be an electrician, and then versus your friend who's taken 6 years to get to where they are, and they may not have as good as benefits as you. It's a lot more security.
Well, I'm looking for your higher ed, sorry, Harlan, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I just wanted to pull it out, not to deter from higher ed, but I just wanted to put it out there.
They'll pay you for your additional training. So I know the Arizona Carpenter Association, once a quarter you go in and you get you redo, you learn an additional skill, or you just retake a class, get a recertification. But I know people that have gone and started construction, and then they're oh, I want to learn welding, and they'll pay for them to be welding. And welders make so much money, sometimes I really think about it. But anyways, the union will do that. And the union you all have to start off at a stronger rate. And so I think by the time you graduate or you finish the apprenticeship with the Arizona Carpenter Association, you're making almost $35 an hour, no matter who you are. They have to pay you that. So, I mean, I highly agree with that. You guys got to know about the unions too.
It sounds like there are a lot of resources out there. How do we make those resources more accessible and increase awareness?
Just having conversations like we are right here on this foundation, I think, is a first step, and having our allies do it for us. And it's not enough that our women are constantly talking about equal pay. It means a lot more. It just means more when it's coming from people that already having these privileges, right? So, that inclusion starts with having that conversation and taking some form of action, right? And we look at some of the things that have happened in the last few years. In 2018 California was the first state to do this. I know 3 other states have taken an account where it is now required to have at least one female on a board. As a board member. And so prior to that, that wasn't the case. And a lot of companies are obviously now getting fined if they're not. And to see that across the country, ideally, that's something that we want to see. I want to see half and half, right? But it's important to know that some of these conversations are going to take some time, and some of these new bills, new acts that are in place are fairly not only new. Most states are still not incorporated. Like the Lilly Ledbetter Act was just passed in 2009, and so that was to help with the discriminatory pay, right? But a lot of companies are slowly implementing some of these that acts that are functionally still new, and so I think it's part of not only educating other people, but having people advocate for us. I mean, it's one thing that's, us three Latinas are talking about it, but if other people aren't buying into it, even today, I get a little disappointed when I go on my social media where I'm like, really, my friends, my colleagues, especially within the finance space, aren't putting their hashtag for Latina equal pay, or it's like, that's what we need. We need some more of visibility. I still get people like, what is that? And I think that's something that will help elevate that conversation to actually take some action.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I feel like around the entire conversation around equal pay and all the different equal pay days and all the different groups, and everybody gets so bogged down with that initial number of the 80 cents on a dollar for women when they totally forget, they don't even know about the other groups, about the other days. So when Latina equal pay day falls at the end of the year, after all these other equal pay days have already happened, they're like, what is this? So I do feel like, yeah, we need to continue to talk on platforms like this, continue to urge others to share, and definitely allies share the stuff, get engaged, and maybe talk about it too. I think like just people like white women, if they're going to rep their equal pay day, or like any other group, that we should just rep like every equal pay day, or just try some reason to try some way to make it a little bit more, I guess, I don't know how to say, but kind of like tied together, because I feel like there's so much confusion around all the equal pay days and all the, and then that, I guess I'll stop there.
I think that has to do too. People were big on allies, or were big on people like, hey, it sounds cool when like a white guy is talking about Latina equal pay or someone else. At the same time, while I'm all for allies, and this is just my personal opinion, I think too we have to be careful the narrative that those allies are saying on our behalf. I'm a big, loud, proud Latina woman, and I know that I myself feel like I don't need anyone to speak for me, especially to say that I had it hard when they don't have that experience, or they don't have that. They're not speaking from our perspective necessarily, but I think it's really important that we share with them what kind of narrative they should be saying. I feel like a lot of allies, especially in the personal finance community, have more of a savior complex. And that's something that I myself have had to go back and forth. I feel like there is a bit of a savior complex when people are trying to be an ally. There's a right way to be an ally, and there's a wrong way to be an ally. So that's just my own personal opinion.
I totally
absolutely
agree on that. I mean, it's that we're wondering if it's more for the show of the company. They're saying, oh yeah, we're being supportive. This is a movement that they're doing, but they're not really following through on it. And personally, talking about, we're obviously very outspoken women, Latinas, that you can say. But when I see the majority of women, especially a lot of my clients that I deal with, they're nervous about being able to speak up. And for me too, that there's still moments where I get very, I feel like I don't want to be pigeonholed, always like, oh, she's always talking about gender equality and this. And so it kind of becomes, not only is it become exhausting, it's part of that where we do need some of that invitation. And that's part of what I mean by allies, because very often, majority of my mentors have always been men because of my industry. It's usually I've always been the only female in these companies. And so a lot of them took me under their wing, and it's unfortunate, but the boys clubs still very much exist. And when they would take me under their wing and say, I'm going to help you, I'm going to show you some of these things, it's allowed me to show that window to tons of women, thousands of women across the country. And so something like that, I think it's really powerful. It doesn't mean that their voices are more important than ours, but it just becomes draining when you're doing it for so long. And I know a lot of women are just afraid to speak up. And I think that's part of the privilege that we have about these platforms, that we can hopefully use some of not only our experiences, but hopefully help share their stories, because sometimes it's that fear of, if you're undocumented, I didn't become a citizen until I was 13. So there's a lot of traumatic things that I've had to encounter still, that, the fear of people are gonna be like, oh, go back to your own country. Or it's always these comments that we hear when we're just trying to say, we just want to be treated equal. We're not asking for extra special care. We're just saying, this is something that everyone has the right to have when it comes to equal pay.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to first say, obviously, my skin is very white. I am Latina, but I am white, I guess. But where I wanted to go with this was when we're talking about women or anybody that feels discouraged to even talk about something like the Latina Equal Pay Day. Today, the majority of stress I have is from social media because everything I've posted, I hate the people that are like, oh, it's a hoax, or where'd you get your sources, or this, and this was debunked. And it's like, this is why people don't want to freaking talk about this, is because you have the online tools, which you can't let it get to you. I mean, it's natural to let it get to you, but you can't let it get to you.
Right.
Yeah, I can't spend too much time on social media these days anymore. It's just far too much to deal with. COVID, speaking of, hoaxes, how has that affected Latinas?
Somebody else tell me, sorry.
It says as hoax. Sorry, I just saw Borat the other day and I can't stop laughing the whole hoax virus thing. You guys need to laugh. Watch the new Borat movie. It's really funny. I just kind of want to crack jokes right now. But anyway, so Latinos, according to statistics, are the population that's been affected most by COVID. I know back in April or May, it was reported that 4 out of 10 Latinos had lost their job in New York City due to COVID. I think because previously, a lot of our generations before us have gone more into service industries, and the service industry was highly affected by COVID. I know Arizona, we still have not rebounded, and a lot of our local businesses are now closed. But I think that was one of the reasons. And then also a lot of us, some people aren't eligible for unemployment, and there was that assumption that everybody was eligible for unemployment, and they aren't. Even if you are technically here legally and you pay taxes, it's just dependent on your visa status. Some people can qualify for unemployment, some can't. Sometimes you can't. You really aren't. I don't think you are. It's some people. So a lot of financial institutions won't even let you open a checking account without a social security number, despite having an EIN and paying taxes here in the nation. But that was just one of the reasons that we were affected higher than other populations.
Yeah, and another resource I like was through We All Grow Latina. They did a few recent panels and posts on what programs are actually available, like Athena saying that everyone qualifies. And so they provide other programs that basically for those people that are not being included in the census, that are not being included in these PPE programs. And I think especially for those that are business owners, this is really hitting hard because they're already struggling to try to make it pre-COVID. And so now that not everybody has the opportunity to work from home, virtually, this is not necessarily an option for them. So it's I don't want to say it's just a frustrating time, but it's something that I think we're going to see a lot more people struggle, and the fact that we're not trying to be more sensitive to it or try to see how we can help. I think that's something that's going to be a challenge for all of us to try to step up and say, what can I do? What can I do to support local businesses? When I talk about, women own, I would say, women own, and preferably if you could do women of color, because it's that we don't have generational wealth. It's even when you start doing well, you are still helping your family. And that also has a lot to do with how less disposable income we have. It becomes, can I help my family? Can I help my tia? Can I help my grandma? It's how do we not only learn to help ourselves, but those around us. And so, it has a lot of conversations being had. And I feel you, Harlan, on the social media thing, because it's hard. There's times where I'm like, I have to shut off because it's a lot to take in, especially during COVID.
Yeah, and I think Latinas being affected by COVID, not only is that individual affected, but the family's affected. We've always had like grandma, grandpa stay with us, or cousins, aunts stay with us. And I know, like, if I was in a position where I was supporting, let's say, a couple of family members living with us, and I lost my job, and let's say I didn't have an emergency fund, I would be screwed. And then not being able to access unemployment on top of that. It's like the person is not only being affected, like the entire family is being affected in ways that other families aren't.
Well, and that's funny you brought that up because I just thought about this. So you have the multi-generational households. And if I go out in the public and I get COVID, maybe I'm not affected as much as, because maybe I'm healthier. But if I bring that back to maybe my elderly parents or my elderly grandparents, the COVID can take them out. And so I know that was prohibiting a lot of people from feeling safe to go out into the public and work as well. And then I know I work in education, so I have a lot of friends who are still in the classroom. And that's been a huge source of contentment as these schools want to open back up. But the kids are like, I can't go because I'm going to bring it back to my, my elders. So that could be another reason too why we are affected by COVID.
Yeah, and not having health insurance, not having that extra resource to be able to cope with it if they are found positive, right? And so it's
right. We don't go to the doctor. We drink tequila or we make the little air cone and we're like, let's do this.
So what can companies do to provide more of a balanced opportunity for Latinas?
So the company I work at currently is the first company that I've ever worked at that does this. And the reason I got this information was I asked them. So the company I work for, they do these, I guess, periodic internal earnings audits. And then they actually go out to people that they see that they're being paid less in the market or it doesn't match up to the rest of the team. And then they actually just randomly give out like these raises for like these market, I guess, match raises. And then I asked, when I first was getting like kind of more informed about pay gaps in general, I asked our HR department if they had any kind of documentation that showed transparency for earnings. And they said, yeah, here you go. And it was this giant chart that was per organization, per position, and per years that you were there, because it would like figure in the specific, I guess, raises or bonuses for those years. And it's just laid it all out. And I was like, what? This is crazy that you do this. And they're like, oh, we have to follow these rules. We're part of this specific initiative with these other companies. It's like, okay, well, that's really cool. I mean, I know it's cool for like a set of companies to do that, but how do we get that to, to more companies and more, I guess, probably some sort of regulation, maybe across certain industries to get those out. But of course, that's different per like government jobs where everybody in like union jobs get paid basically the same and people kind of know what each other gets paid.
So how did that data that you were provided inform your approach to your job there? And then does the company use that data to right size or move things around and make things more balanced?
Yeah, so I actually used it because I wanted to see if I was getting paid less than anybody else. Because I've had experience in the past where I was getting paid less than someone else in the same position with the same level of experience, the same education, who was a male. But it was really early in my career, and it's the only time I was ever able to verify something like that. And I just did it out of curiosity. They didn't really go in too much detail about the entire process of how they do all this stuff. But they just kind of laid out like the groundwork was like, this is when we do this. It's basically quarterly. If you get affected by it, there's like, they don't kind of send out communications like, oh, what's happening? It's just, if you were affected by it, if your position like were to get a raise from it, then you just be contacted from your manager.
Any other policies from companies that would help to solve this situation?
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with their management, right? So company culture, transparency is number one. I'm all for, ditto on what she just mentioned. But when it comes to private companies, that transparency isn't always available. You're actually signing away saying, I won't discuss my salary or my pay. So I think part of it is also to do with management. And we don't see as much Latinas in management. We do see about 40% right now across the country. So that's great. That means there's definitely some movement that women are taking on these higher positions. But because there is like that less of, not to say sisterhood, but it's less of that transparency amongst each other. If companies can show also teach all your employees, especially women, negotiation classes, right? So those self-development courses are extremely helpful for us to know how to not only negotiate our better pay, but to really understand what value we're bringing to the company, right? And so we feel like we're being invested more because we're obviously investing our time, our sweat equity, even our own invested time in our education when we bring them to these companies. So I think for companies to really be part of a partnership and just really looking at what their company culture looks like. Right now, we're seeing still a lot of tokenism. And for many people, it's funny where I'm like, I talk about tokenism, they're like, what is that? And I go, it's being the only person other, right? So especially when I talk about STEM, those type of industries, we're still seeing that there are very few women, let alone women of color, and the Latinas even minuscule. So I think that's something that when companies really need to say, hey, we're diverse and inclusive, look at the entire company and say, is that really the case? We see that in entertainment, especially in shows. There's a whole breakdown if you're a writer and a director, producer within that particular report. And I'm always astonished by where I'm like, they're creating our content, right? So behind the scenes, it's still primarily male, primarily white. And so if companies start to really figure out that, hey, we do need to include, having one or two is not good enough, but also being transparent of what we're paying them, what we're talking about when it comes to negotiating your wage, promotions. I think that's one of the things that we still fall short of.
Yeah, on promotions and negotiations, does anyone have any tips for just being an effective negotiator when you're Latina?
Do your research. Do your research and find out what other people are making. There's a website, glassdoor.com, where it tells you, the average of what someone is making in your field. Sometimes it's very depending on the field you're in. Sometimes I'm a nonprofit, so I can type in nonprofit program manager and it'll give me an estimate of what nonprofit program managers in the state of Arizona make. I find that's a really good tool to kind of get a ballpark of what you're doing when you're negotiating. And then also come up with a list. I remember I was in an Elevate meetup. I think it was in DC and at FinCon, and Dominic Broadway, he's an amazing speaker. And he actually told everybody, he's like, keep a win file. So every time you go back and things are hard or you're frustrated, you can go back at your file and, you can see all the things that you have done throughout the year. And I highly recommend that for work. Keep a win file, keep a file of all the things that you have done that have been super successful. I was able to negotiate for a raise because I had a state leadership program. I took 12 kids to Washington, D.C. last year. I actually got us into McSally's office and Bernie Sanders' office. And it was really cool. And I had footage of the kids doing that in Bernie Sanders' office. And at the time he was running for president. And so that was something I was able to put in my win file. So even if it's something like I got an email from my boss congratulating me on my report, or someone told me I was doing a great job on this project, write it down. So then that way, when it's time to go up for your annual review, or it's time for you to ask for that raise, you have a list of accomplishments and things you've brought to the table that you can negotiate with.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah,
it's easy for us to go, especially I get very emotional. And it's easy for me to go, oh my God, I should be paid more. My boss is like, okay, well, what'd you do? And I'm like, So now I'm like, actually, please hold while I gather some receipts. This is what I've done. This is what you've done. I'm just kidding. I don't have to tell my boss that. I'm scared. Don't look at me, boss. But, you keep that running list of stuff that you've done. So then that way, when it's time, you're not racking your brain. You're like, okay, this is what I've been working on. So thank you, Dominic Broadway, for that win file tip.
It's that, right? What you're bringing to the table, how much money you're bringing to the company, right? I'm going to plug my second TEDx talk was called The Confidence Gap. It's about the gender wage gap. And I gave 5 tips on that. But one that she just mentioned, obviously know your stats, know what you're bringing to the table. But one that I have to tell people is practice it. Practice it with your mentor. Practice it with your boss if possibly, or your supervisor, and then whoever you're going to ask for them extra money. Because it's just that where you want to go in there knowing they're going to come back and say, okay, fine, you did that, great. And what about this? Or so-and-so is also doing that within the team. So it's being able to be ready and coming in. And unfortunately for us women, sometimes they say, oh, you're too aggressive or you're too straightforward. And that's a good thing. I look at it as a compliment, right? When someone, says something like that, because it's like, that means I know exactly what I want. I know how to articulate that. And when we walk into the office, when we're going to ask for that extra money, it's having that confidence to say, I earned this much. This is how much I made for the company. This is the not just the education, the experience that I'm bringing to the table, but this is why you're missing out. This is somehow be almost ready to walk away. Obviously you don't want to, but if that is the case, know your industry and looking at the glass ceiling, different websites that will help provide that amount of what salary should look like for you. And also include some of the things that most people aren't looking at. If you're bilingual, hey, that's another place that you should be getting paid. How often do I hear people say, oh, I translated this for my company. I'm like, did they pay you extra for that? They're like, no. And I go, guess what? They would have had to pay a translator for that, top dollar. And it's these little areas that unfortunately for especially Latinas, we play so many different roles that they think we'll do it for free always. And that's when I always say, no, you have to know your worth. You have to know that every particular skill that you're bringing in should also be compensated for. And so walking in, knowing exactly what you want and understanding that, even talking about some of those challenges, saying, you know what, it took me 5 years to graduate from college, but I did it because I had to work full time and I had to be able to put support myself through that particular major, as opposed to someone that did it in 4 years and didn't have to go, work full time. And so that's somehow I always approach it and say, this is why I deserve it over anyone else, because I'm sure other people are negotiating, and it shows a lot of stats that men will negotiate their first, their hiring and when they're getting promoted. Yet with women, we fall short on that. And so this is a place that we can really start stepping that up.
Yeah. So there is some awesome groups too. There may be at your company. Some companies don't have these, but they're called ERGs. They're employee resource groups. And they're put together to kind of like offer a space to talk about things like salary, and maybe there is a position you want to move laterally to or up, or even talking about preparing for something like a review, or for talking about salary negotiation for a raise. So what you could do in these groups is you can talk to a mentor, and then that mentor can also put you in touch with sponsors across the company as well. These are people that advocate on behalf of you. So like when they're in certain groups, they can mention your name, or when they're talking about the candidates for a certain position, or when you're moving laterally or up, they can basically drop your name. And then you can also meet with these people, speak to them, practice with them too of negotiating, and then, try to be like kind of results driven when you're talking about the accomplishments that you've done. That's kind of given me probably the most success.
Before we get on to move on to some policy questions, is there anything else that Latinas can do from an individual perspective that might improve their situation and reduce the pay gap?
I'm a big be the change you wish to see in the world person. And I feel like if I am not talking the talk, or if I'm talking the talk, I have to walk the walk. And so something that I did that I'm insanely proud of, about a month and a half ago, I hired 2 virtual assistants. I have them both doing very different things dependent on their skill set, but they're both Latina. And so I was really excited and I was really proud. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, if you're going to hire a virtual assistant, you need to outsource it here and there. But I was so proud that I was able to find 2 Latinas in the US, and I pay them a competitive wage according to US and for virtual assisting. But it was really important to me, especially as I grow my business and as I take over the world, that I am also empowering other Latinas, and I'm bringing other Latinas up with me.
That's awesome. I hired a virtual assistant too. Yvonne, if you're watching.
Amy and Stephanie, what up?
And I think that's a great solution there. Is like, if you are a side hustler, small business owner, you can take part in closing the wage gap yourself and paying who you hire fairly. So the virtual assistant I hired, Yvonne, I just basically asked her, what do you want to get paid? And she's like, X. And I was like, here you go.
Yep. That's why I was like, what's your rate? And they're like, this. I'm like, all right, done. And then the other one, I was like, what do you want? And she's like, whatever you'll pay me. And I'm like, we'll start you off at this. She's like, okay, great. Oh man, I gotta tell my assistants to step it up, Danielle. But Danielle and I also had this conversation on Twitter. We're like, we hired assistants. Now we have to go out and make money. We don't
it's so
right now I have to
true.
do stuff.
I think that's something that lately, I just had that conversation yesterday of, everyone's, starting something on Instagram and you're like calling themselves a boss. I'm like, are you really a boss? Do you have, your payroll? Do you have those people that like depend on you? And I think that's something that it's part of being that solution. And that's partly why we create jobs and we able to help them and teach them, hey, negotiate, right? My sister was like, should I work at this other place for 2 years with no increase in her hourly rate. And I thought, and I explained to her, I'm like, you need to go negotiate every year. If they're not doing some kind of audit with you, then you need to step up and come in and negotiate. So I think that's something that it's up to us to not only create some of those jobs, but also create that path. And I'm thankful for being able, having this part of this platform at the Plutus Foundation, because it's that where we are creating jobs, where you're sharing our stories. I started investing in real estate at a really young age, and it was really lonely. It still is. And so I think when we start to say, this is what we're doing, I need help here, and people that help me, I'm going back and doing the same. And so it has a lot to do with what we can do for ourselves and teach others to do the same. So thank you for this platform, because that's what we put towards that.
Your assistant is so sweet. I'm gonna have
She's the best.
Record this and send this to my assistants. Just kidding, assistants.
There's a lot of VA envy going on right now.
I know. I'm like, hey, where's my comments of love? Just kidding.
So from a policy perspective, what would you like to see in terms of whether it's laws or regulations, state or federal? What can be done to eliminate the pay gap, and how do we make that happen?
Accountability. A lot of states are still falling short. Even if these acts and bills are in place, a lot of companies are still not taking they're not taking that into consideration when they're hiring new people. And unfortunately, with these referral programs, what happens is people will refer people that look like them, and so most likely don't come from different backgrounds with them. And we're talking about major corporations, some of the biggest companies in the world. And so sometimes it's looking at the bigger picture of like, how diverse are we really within our company? How are we actually speaking to our customers too? Too often I get, and I'm sure the other ladies probably have similar stories, where I've said no to many sponsors that I don't want to flat out work with, because I know that they're basically just trying to say, well, we already sell to the Latino market. We would love someone's insight. And for them, it's basically, they're just trying to get to me to be able to speak on behalf of them. When I'm like, one, you haven't really invested in our community, and I'm not going to sell out, our community when I know you're not really in it, your heart isn't in it. And I think it's being able to identify that and sometimes walk away from that is really difficult. But when companies start to really ask themselves that question on how we can be more supportive within those communities that they want to target, and come from a place of more of a genuine place, as opposed to just like, oh, we already market to them and we want to sell more to them. Well, guess what? Most of us already can tell. And so I think that's one way for us to make sure we keep them accountable for what they're doing.
I think another thing too is encouraging people to get up and vote. I think it's really important that we understand who our candidates are and what they stand for. I know at least locally, if you look at, okay, who are the judges you're electing into office? Who are the prosecutors you're electing into office? Are they for my community or are they against my community? And that's the same with Senate. Are these people okay with, equal pay? Is equality with, gender and, race, is that a big platform they have? Are they quiet when stuff like Black Lives Matters, like the movement, are they quiet about that? And I'm not trying to get political on here, but at the same time, you have to look and see who you are electing into office, because that's going to affect the rights in your state. Arizona, I know, is a right to work state. So I could go to work tomorrow. My boss could be like, sorry, we're over you, bye. And I'd be like, what? And that's something that can happen in Arizona. And I know there's other few states like that, but maybe you want to talk to somebody who isn't about that. And that's something that can help protect your career and your job.
Yeah, definitely locally on the state level is important.
Yeah, can we give shout out to Miranda, by the way? I know Miranda's part of the Plutus Foundation, but seeing her run, I think it's just great to see there's women, women are stepping up, and I think we're going to see more of that. And, just within the last election to see that there's some movement happening. And so, yeah, and I like it, Athena, talk politics to me, because I think that has a lot to do with the way we still function in our society. Is people are staying away from that. And I sometimes get very political, especially on my post or something. And it's sometimes people tell me that's dangerous, but at the same time, like, this is exactly why I have this platform, to be able to speak up for those that, don't have that voice. So
I just did something actually with iwillvote.com, and they reached out to me and they're like, hey, do you want to talk about Latinas voting? And I was like, yeah, I do, iwillvote.com. But on my Instagram, I talked about voting and how I'm voting. I'm voting for Biden and Harris because I want them to, I want my kids to see themselves in the White House, and they're going to be able to do that with Camilla in there. So I was really excited, and I was really I talked about Bernie Sanders, and I was like, he was my first pick. Shout out to Bernie again. But Joe Biden is still going to do something very similar. And I want my kids to be, I want the world to be a good place for my kids when they leave college. So I want it to be a good place for them now. But we'll talk politics later.
It's like politics. But
you have to watch Borat.
I mean, voting, of course, vote and encourage others to vote. And definitely the people that think, oh, well, my vote doesn't matter, or, whatever reason they think that, oh, voting won't do anything, it's corrupt, whatever. And then be transparent about who you're voting for. I mean, I'm voting for Biden and Harris. So
I was just ecstatic when I saw her the day that she was nominated. I don't know, for many women, just women in general, the next day we were like, there's some hope just to see that representation.
Yeah. Not only right. Not only is our vice president going to be a woman, she's going to be a woman of color. And I am just and yes, I'm already calling it. She's going to be our vice president next week. But I'm so stoked. I'm so excited.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
I'm glad to hear there's some hope for the future. The more time I spend on social media, the less hope I have. The more time I talk to people, the more hope I have. So that's good.
Stay on Facebook, Harlan. Stay off Facebook.
I'm trying. So, any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
Don't hide your passion. I know something that I've heard a lot of with, Latinas in general. People are like, oh, you're feisty. Oh, you're spicy. Oh, you're this. Oh, I heard Latinas are crazy. Blah, 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 blah. I don't feel like I'm crazy. I can be crazy, but I feel like I'm actually more passionate than anything. And I feel like that's something that women need to stand their ground, especially Latinas, is don't lose your passion, because your passion is what is going to fuel you and what's going to get you through the next tough thing that you have to tackle in your life.
Yeah. What makes you different makes you powerful.
Yes.
So use it.
I think to walk away for those that are still trying to figure out how they can help, especially if they're not Latina, is educate yourself on the vocabulary, right? We, as Latina, I was just talking about it today on a webinar about code switching, talking about oppression and what does that look like, microaggressions, specific things that are told to us at work, where I'm still in shock sometimes when, I travel, pre-COVID, I traveled all over the country. And, when people says, oh, you're so exotic, or, your wild hair, or, oh, you don't sound like a Latina, or your accent, or something, that it's, people need to understand that there's a such thing as microaggressions. There's also racism, flat out racist saying. So understanding that there's certain vocabulary that we can start using on everyday language to not only be more inclusive, but to be more sensitive to what is happening, especially right now. Many of us are talking about Black Lives Matter because this is something that has been affecting our communities forever. And when it comes to talking about people of color, we're not just Latina or Latinx. It's like many of us are Afro-Latinas, different descendants. So I think it's something that if you learn to not only hopefully use the right vocabulary, but you start teaching your kids and your colleagues how to watch what they say, because too often, all the time lately on Instagram, I have my girlfriends that were like, oh my God, I never knew this day existed, or I feel ashamed that I never heard of June 19th, or all these other specific days that are extremely important that make up, which is 400 years of racist, oppression within our country. I think this is something that we can say, well, a lot of this equal gender wage gap, any discrimination we have towards women has a lot to do with the system has been in place for that long.
I think that's so important to use the right vocabulary and educate others. People always probably will first take offense when you call them out, to be like, oh, why are you calling me out on microaggression? Little things like, where are you from? It's like, I'm from here. Where are you from? That saying that you kind of see on TV shows.
Or it's
something I heard since I was a kid.
Yeah, how did you
they would see my brown dad, my white mom, and be like, where are you from? Like,
yeah, I get the how did you get your name? How are you a Latina named Athena? How'd that happen? I'm like
What is Daniella? Never heard that before. Well, if you would like to Google the name and find the origin, by all means do so. But you know, I guess don't be like me. I'm rude sometimes. Be nice and just try to educate them that maybe the way they're coming off isn't the best way.
All right. So yeah, I think this was a great conversation, and I know I learned a lot. And you know, it's always interesting to find out what more the Plutus Foundation can do to support the entire community too. So feel free to reach out to me if you ever have any thoughts, and or if you need support, or just have a post you want shared. You know, we're happy to do that. And why don't we just close this off now? And certainly, if anyone has any questions, they can continue to comment or reach out to you guys individually. So let's share how they can do that. Natalie, why don't you start?
Sure. On Instagram, I'm Financially Savvy Latina. Website, podcast, my books are financially savvy in 20 minutes.com is the website. So yeah, definitely reach out if there's any way. And all my content is bilingual. So I very much, that's one of the things that I want to promote, that we're not only speaking for ourselves, we're speaking for our parents that don't speak the language, or grandparents. And so, and for those newcomers, right? So love to hear from you, and thank you for this platform again.
Athena?
On all platforms, I am Money Smart Latina, except Twitter. I'm according Athena. I had to do something different because I'm extra. But a lot of my content is on Instagram and then on my website at moneysmartlatina.com. And then, yeah, you guys can stalk me all you want. I'm always here, and I appreciate stalkers. They make me feel fancy, so go for it.
Daniella?
I am Daniella Flores. You can find me at I Like to Dabble, basically everywhere online besides Instagram. I'm I Like to Dabble blog, and my website is iliketodabble.com.
All right. And anyone watching can find out more about what we do at the Plutus Foundation following us on Plutus Awards on Instagram and Twitter, and on our website, plutusfoundation.org. We'll be talking about some new webinars that we'll be putting out next year very soon. Right now, we're focused on the Plutus Awards. It's been a lot of fun putting that together, so I hope you can all join us.
Hold up. I think all three of us are nominated for a Plutus Award.
Oh, I think that's right. And there's going to be a lot of celebration coming up very soon in a couple of weeks. So yes, thank you so much to all of you, Athena, Natalie, Daniella. It's been great having you here. It's been great having this conversation. I would love for us to talk more about this topic and continue this conversation. It's something that goes beyond October 29th. It is a full year thing. So yeah, let's continue that. And thank you again. And I just have a lot of gratitude for this. Thank you.